Hi everyone, my name is Cynthia. Let's talk books. Today I'm here to talk about books numbers 51 through 55 of the books that I'm reading in 2023. So let's get right to it. Book number 51 that I read is a work of nonfiction. It is Plain Indian by Philip J. Deloria. So this is a book that I read thinking of its usefulness in my teaching. And it is something that I'm going to incorporate into my classes. I definitely need to include a lot more Indigenous history into my courses. And I think this was a book to help me think about that. However, it is very heavily academic and has a lot of theory in it. So it's not necessarily a book that I would recommend to the casual reader, and especially not to someone who is wanting to get more into reading nonfiction. This book is just too heavy for that. Some of the more theoretical heavy sections are kind of skimmable if you are interested in just the analysis of how U.S. history has been shaped by non-Indigenous people playing Indian. That is the central theme of this book, is that Americans, in the sense of what it means to be American, gets filtered through the definition of Indigenous communities and how non-Indigenous communities relate to those Indigenous communities. So it starts off with one of the earliest examples of Europeans playing Indian, which is the Boston Tea Party, right? And it is clear the way that Deloria talks about it, that the colonists were not just simply trying to disguise themselves. In fact, Deloria talks about how most of them were not really disguised. Like, some of them may have put paint on their face, but they didn't really try to hide who they were. And most people knew who it was that had participated in the Boston Tea Party. For them, it was a way to reject Englishness, a way of rejecting that connection to England via dumping all the tea in Boston, but also like using Indigenous motifs, right? Putting feathers on themselves, putting paint on themselves. They were not actually trying to be Indian. They were just using ideas of what it meant to be Indian to them, right? This is European ideas of Indianness to create an American identity at a time where there is no American identity, right? Most of these colonists identified with their European countries, not with any kind of Americanness. But by like pretending to be Indians, they're asserting an identity that's rejecting Englishness. Anyways, it's super interesting. And then Deloria takes us all the way into, the more recent past, talking about the way in which Europeans were attending powwows, the way they were interacting with Indigenous people in cities, the Boy Scouts, the Girl Scouts, the Boy Scout connection to playing Indian is really, really interesting. Like, I have this whole lesson plan idea in my head about that I want to do with one of my classes. So it's a really, really interesting book, but it's really theoretically heavy. Again, it has a lot of theory. So if you're not someone that's really into theory, you're going to find that those sections difficult to read. I'm not a heavy theory person, but I attended a grad school in which theory was heavily emphasized. So like, it took me like a chapter to be able to get into it and to realize that, like, okay, the theory is there for a large section, but then the actual sources, what's being analyzed, is actually really interesting and relevant, which doesn't happen in a lot of really theoretical books. But so this one was a win for me. The next book that I read was Brenham Wood by Eleanor Catton. And I don't remember where I heard about this book. I suspect it was on TikTok. But this is an environmental thriller. So this is a very common theme that's been emerging in thrillers and in sci-fi stories, kind of this environmental disaster or environmental themes in there. In this one, this is a very modern setting. It's set in the UK, in which you have an environmentalist group that, like, their goal is to take up spaces, green spaces around the community that are not used, and grow vegetables and fruit, and just use those spaces to grow food, feed themselves, and then sell off any excess. Now, the group has been operating for a number of years, and they're not very successful, and most people actually don't know about the way that they are illegally using some of these green spaces. Like, some people are participating in the group, but they're doing it from more of an outsider take, and they're not partaking in some of the illegal activities the group is participating in. And now, within the group, we get several different perspectives, and we get deep into the dynamics within some of the members of the group. There is one returning member that is coming back from having lived abroad, and then all of a sudden, the leader of the group has found a space that she thinks is ideal for using as green growing space. They will be done illegally, though, because it's private property, and there's no way that they will get permission to grow food on this land. But she's planning on using it, so she's venturing over to this land to try to figure out how they can illegally use this land, when she meets this extremely wealthy man that is trying to buy that same property. So this is a very slow-paced thriller. Like, the thriller aspects of the book don't really emerge until like 3/4 of the way through. The last like fourth of the book is really heavily, it's a thriller. But the first more than half of the book does not scream thriller. It's like slow pace, character analysis, interactions between people. And so if you don't like that aspect, those things in your books, then you're not gonna like this book, because it feels like it's super slow, a little bit of what's the point here. But if you like those aspects, you might not like the last bit of the book, which is so heavily thriller, like guns blazing, helicopters, people hiding, lying, the police. Everything is intense, and just like shit's happening, and it's a big deal. I don't know if those two sections really merged well for me. They just were a little bit too distinct, and so I'm not sure that the overall book worked 100% for me, but there were aspects in there that I really liked. I liked some of the themes. I liked the way that the author was investigating the internal dynamics of this environmentalist group were, the idea of living your ideals versus selling out. Some of that was a little bit heavy-handed, but I still like the exploration of those ideas, and because this is a longer book, there is room to explore some of those themes quite well. So overall, this was a good book for me. It's probably not going to end up in like my year-end favorites, but I thought this was a very solid, really good book if you're interested in those themes. The next book that I read is Sayanarka, A Young Woman, a Devious Surgeon, in the Harrowing Birth of Modern Women's Health by J.C. Hallman. I very rarely do this, but this is a book that I heard about on TikTok. I heard that it was available on NetGalley. I then went out and looked for it on NetGalley and requested it. I rarely do this because at this point I have enough publishers suggesting books to me, and it's not like I have a huge amount, like, oh my god, publishers won't leave me alone sending me arcs on NetGalley, but there's enough of them that I can manage right now, and if I go out and search for more, I fear not being able to manage all of the arcs that I have available. So this one I specifically went out looking for because I really I love teaching about these topics. This is focused around J. Marion Sims, the doctor who is credited as the father of modern American gynecology in the U.S. You might have heard him in the news because in the last few years there has been a movement to try to take down the statues of him that exist in cities, towns, and in hospitals and medical schools because he did all of his research on enslaved women in highly unethical ways. And this is not just like, well, at the time people did this. This was like at the time he was conducting his experiments, people were speaking out about the use of enslaved women in these unethical ways. Like it was sketchy at the time, and he ends up when he first publishes on his research, he like is open about using enslaved women for his experiments, but later on he ends up hiding that because it was something that he was being criticized on. In this book, what Hallman does is try to dig up as much information as he can on the women that Sims was experimenting on. And so that's why I was really interested in this book, because we don't know much about these women. They were enslaved women, and so they're oftentimes only recorded as property. And so there's just not been a lot of information. However, he is able to uncover the life of this one particular woman that Sims experimented on. He experimented on some of these women like 10, 20, 30, 40 plus surgeries on some of these women he did. What he was trying to do was figure out how to repair a tear between the uterus and the bladder that sometimes occurs in women, especially after giving birth. The tear there means that urine often leaks into the woman's uterus and leaks out, and it's uncontrollable, and so it makes people pariahs when they experience this. And what Sims was doing was not just trying to cure this, he was really trying to become famous. That was his goal in life, was trying to become famous and wealthy. And so he sees an opportunity in being able to experiment on enslaved women so that he could use that cure on white women and become rich. So again, everything about this screams, I am going to love this book. This is going to be fantastic. I wrote a review of the book on Goodreads because this was an ARC. So I always publish ARC reviews on wherever I can. So if anybody's interested, I will link my review there. I thought this book did some amazing work of history, just incredible work uncovering the life of Anarccha, this one enslaved woman. But I have some key criticisms of the book. One, the author is using the theme of like comets and celestial bodies too much. I felt like it was a theme that reoccurs over and over again, but it's not deeply connected to either Anarccha or Sims. Like that kind of thing can be used to link individuals, but I felt it was unnecessary and got in the way at multiple points in the story, where like you start off the chapter and there's a long description of a comet and the public's reaction to a comet, and then you transition into the history, and it, to me, as those transitions were happening, it felt like the discussions of the comets was just distracting. Again, that was my take on it. I also thought that the author put in too much. It's clear that he did an immense amount of research, and it felt like every little piece of information that he was finding, he's putting in this book. And the thing with writing nonfiction that can be really difficult is choosing what doesn't go into the story, right? What is relevant tangentially, but isn't necessary to tell the story you're telling. And I felt that there was a lot there. For example, there's one individual in the story, who ends up having a military career. He is connected through marriage to Marion Sims, and also connected through marriage to the family that ends up owning Anarccha, the enslaved women that Sims experimented on. And there is a lot of pages dedicated to the military career of this one man, where I'm like, he's tangentially related. We didn't need to hear all of his story. But what occurred with this particular review that has never happened to me before is that the author immediately responded to my review on Goodreads. And this is something that I've been deeply afraid of for about the past year, to the point where I've actually been holding back on writing reviews on like Goodreads and social media even, because I've seen authors do this a lot more. Find even positive reviews. I've seen authors reply to 4-star reviews and like try to criticize the reviewer for a 4-star review, which is still a very good review. It's 4 out of 5 stars. Now, on Goodreads, I gave this book 3 stars. 3 out of 5 stars. This is still a solid review. This is a book that I would not discourage anyone from reading. I just thought that there were significant issues with the book that prevented me from like wholeheartedly like loving it and giving it a 5-star review, even though I think that the history that is uncovered here is amazing and important. So anyways, I wrote my review, and the author responded, and he responded to all of my critiques of the book, which made me feel really uncomfortable. Now, the author was not attacking me. I didn't feel like it was an attack. I did feel, though, that the response was defensive, and made me really uncomfortable, because I don't tag authors in reviews because I don't want their responses to my reviews, right? I write reviews and I film reviews for other readers to discuss books, to start a conversation, to continue a conversation. I never involve authors in my reviews. There are times which authors have found my reviews when they are positive and have commented and said, thank you so much for review, things like that. But never have I had an author respond with like a paragraph responding to my critiques of their book. I did not intend for the author to read my critiques of their book, but they did. And it made me really uncomfortable. I'm saying that here because, one, if you want to see what the author responded to my critiques, you can go on Goodreads and see that. But also because it brings up the discussion of that line dividing readers and authors, right? And I think that line every year continues to become murkier and murkier and to be crossed, and it makes me very uncomfortable. At the same time, now having experienced it, I kind of feel like, well, I can't let the possibility of an author responding to me, prevent me from sharing my reviews with people, because I don't think that I am ever unfair to books, especially not books where the authors are alive and could read my reviews or could watch my reviews. So I try to always be as fair as possible to every book that I am reviewing, because I'm not an author. I mean, I have written nonfiction. I wrote a dissertation, but I haven't published any of my writing. I know that writing is incredibly difficult and personal, and it can feel very like a personal attack when somebody is responding to your book. But at the same time, that's the point of publishing, is to put your work out there, and then you no longer own it or control it. Now it's open to interpretation out into the world, and it makes me really uncomfortable the way in which some writers have crossed those lines. There have been instances of authors stalking reviewers, or of putting all their information online, things like that. And there are reviewers that I think are unfair, especially to books by marginalized authors. But there's never any reason to cross that line. Anyway, long and short of it is the author responded to my review. If you want to see the author's response, it's available on Goodreads. It made me feel really uncomfortable, and it's yeah. Next book that I read was Blameless by Gail Carriger. This is a book. This series is like one of my go-to break in case of emergency series when I'm feeling very anxious, very depressed, really sad, whatever it might be. If I'm having a bad mental health chunk of period, this series will brighten my day. Just reading it is such a joy, because it follows it was a supernatural steampunk story in which you're following preternatural. I think that is what Alexia is. She is married to a werewolf. She is good friends with a vampire, and she leads a council of supernatural beings for Queen Victoria. This book just screams fun. Now, I didn't remember that I already read this. This is book number 3 in the Parasol Protectorate series. I meant to pick up the next book in the series that I hadn't yet read, but I had already read this, but I had forgotten all the details, and so it was actually really great to reread this, and I had a lot of fun rereading this book. So, yeah, this was a fantastic read for me. And then I went into a heavier book. Next book on my list, book number 55 is Your Driver is Waiting by Priya. So this is a book that is meant to be like a retelling of Taxi Driver. Now, I've never read or watched Taxi Driver. So I have no familiarity really with the original content here, so I was just reading this book for what it is. The story follows Damani, who is driving for a rideshare company, so probably something like Uber or Lyft. And this is the only job she's been able to get. She's been trying to get any other job, but right now this is her only source of income. Her father passed away, and her mother has sunk into a depression and is unable to work. And so her life revolves around, picking up fares via her car and taking care of her mother. Because sometimes her mother will be having a crisis and she needs to just be able to pick up and go help her mother. So really, the rideshare job gives her some flexibility. But more and more, the rideshare job has become not doable, in that she's not making enough money to survive on. She's late on a lot of payments. People aren't tipping. So there is a lot of commentary on the economics of rideshare apps and the ethics of it. And I like those aspects of it. So at the same time, Damani is somebody who is on the verge of like some sort of mental health crisis or breakdown. We can tell she's in her head, she's desperate. Her friends that also are rideshare drivers are trying to organize to protest and to get a better deal out of some of these companies, and she's interested in that. She supports them, but she like literally cannot go. She cannot spend time in any kind of activism, because she needs to make enough money to like feed herself and potentially pay some bills. And so that you sense that desperation in her. And then she almost runs this woman over, who is like the most beautiful woman she has ever seen, and she becomes kind of like mesmerized by this individual who keeps coming up again during her day. And I'll leave it at that in terms of the plot. It is a really interesting plot. It wasn't entirely successful for me, so I would give it like a 4 out of 5 stars, because there's so many good elements here. There was just something missing in the story for me. It needed like a little bit more heart, but maybe that's unfair, because we're in the mind of somebody who is in the process of like breaking down, and maybe in the mental state that I was in was just not the best to be reading this book, because I both wanted to be delved more into that and also wanted more separation. So it's unfair to ask a book to do both of those things. I recognize that, but also there's just something there holding me back from fully like loving this book. At the same time, I think it's really interesting. I think the themes here are super interesting. The main character is Sri Lankan, so there's a person in the book in which she's driving around and she sees people protesting issues happening in Sri Lanka, and she's like, yeah, like I should probably be over there helping them, or I agree with them, or this is too political, and like protests are happening a ton, but she's like, I need to focus on making some money. And that, I think, given the current economy, like gig economy, I think those themes will interest a lot of people. So that's it. Those are the next 5 books in my 2023 reading. I've noticed that I'm reading a lot of good books this year, but I'm also reading a lot of books that are falling into the like 4-star range for me, where they're good. They're not favorite books of mine, but they're very good. They're doing really interesting things, and that's something that I might need to do a video on, reflecting more on, because we're about halfway through the year now. Actually, we're exactly halfway through the year now, so it's time to do some of those mid-year like wrap up videos. And I've noticing patterns in my reading as I'm going. Some really interesting things are emerging that I like to reflect on. So watch out. That might be a video coming up on my channel maybe next week or the week after that. But yeah, let me know. We should. I really want to hear people's thoughts on, like, what kind of interactions have you had with authors if you review online, whether you make videos on YouTube or whether you post things on Instagram, on TikTok, on Goodreads, or any like Storygraph. Like, have you had any author interactions? Because on the one hand, I think it's really great when an author finds a glowing review that I've made, but it can be really unsettling when an author finds a more critical review that I've done. And yeah, it makes me uneasy, and I'm wondering how the other people feel about it. I am like friends with, or I follow, or certain authors follow me on social media, and that I think helps blur some of the lines of, like, giving good critical reviews versus, like respecting the space of authors. So I don't know. I want to hear your thoughts. But thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.